About 2 years ago to this very day, DC Rebirth, the big one-shot that started altering the DC universe to resemble more of the pre-Flashpoint continuity as opposed to the New 52, was released, and amongst the big changes and reveals, the biggest one was of course that Dr. Manhattan may or may not have been responsible for the fact that the New 52 happened the way it did, which was both a way to kind of get rid of a big stain off of Barry Allen's record that was hanging over him for years and years and years by that point, and also to basically say, hey guys, Watchmen and the DC Universe are going to cross over. You know, that one storyline we never thought anyone would actually do, and then they decided to do it. And this whole plot line was, of course, started by Geoff Johns and kind of Gary Frank, among other artists who were working with DC Rebirth, you know, the big one-shot. And this has been a running plot line for years and years and years now. And up to the Doomsday Clock, we had several, subplots about Detective Comics and Action Comics about Jor-El taking people from the DC Universe at various different eras, and that was kind of tied into the whole Watchmen business. And then also there was the mini crossover event between Batman and Flash, where they investigate the Comedian's Button, and they get involved, with the Flashpoint universe, because Flashpoint is the only fucking Flash story we can apparently do anymore. And we see Reverse Flash, we get a little glimpse of Dr. Manhattan. It was kind of touted as a big deal when it came out last year, but it ultimately didn't really reveal anything, nor did it advance the whole plot of the DC Universe possibly now being a product of Dr. Manhattan in any kind of meaningful way. But in the summer of 2017, Geoff Johns and Gary Frank both announced that they would be working on both a sequel to Watchmen and also the crossover event that would bridge the two together and explain what the hell is going on with the Doomsday Clock, which immediately evoked both imagery of the Watchmen comic book and also the death of Superman. In fact, one of the first big teaser posters was the whole image of Dr. Manhattan in the background disassembling Superman, and then there was other stuff released about the fact that it would be a maxi series, it would run for 12 issues, and that the rest of the DC Universe would be kind of playing catch-up to the storyline, which basically means that Doomsday Clock happens about a year in universe after all the books, and the rest of the DC Universe is going to be playing catch-up and explaining things and setting up the status quo that we see in Doomsday Clock. And just to kind of give a bit more of an idea of what I'm going to be talking about in this video, which is not going to be obviously a straight-up review because there's a lot of things to discuss here that are just outside the comic. Before Watchmen was another thing that DC tried to do to capitalize on the success and the appeal of the Watchmen storyline. It was basically a series of minis and one-shots that came out around 2012, 2013, just as the New 52 was kicking off, and they were able to get a few fairly, good creators on that stuff like JMS, Brian Azzarello, Darwin Cook, and all the like. But before Watchmen received kind of a big blowback. A lot of people saw it as a massive cash grab. They weren't really interested in what it had to offer. And despite the fact that some of the miniseries like Minutemen and Silk Spectre that were done by Darwin Cook have since gone on to get a lot better reception, they're remembered as kind of like the successful experiments of this whole endeavor. Before Watchmen was just kind of written off almost immediately, and no one really gave a shit when it came out. And I was honestly expecting a similar reaction to happen to this whole news that the DC Universe would be crossing over with Watchmen wholesale, but that's not really what happened. In fact, a lot of people have been anticipating this with great enthusiasm, and despite the fact that the Doomsday Clock is going to be running for a year and a half, rivaling the insanely delayed schedule of Dark Knight 3 Master Race, people are still super excited just on the basis of, holy shit, Watchmen is going to be crossing over with the DC Universe. We never thought they would do that. And a lot of people are doing it for the cool factor because they think crossing over Watchmen with DC is cool and you can do a really good meta-narrative, because there's been a lot of discussion about the fact whether or not Watchmen ruined comic books or made comic books dark. I'm of the opinion that it didn't. Watchmen was just a really popular, really successful thing that a lot of people have and have tried to various levels of success to emulate over the years. A lot of them have fucked up. A lot of them have actually done fairly good emulations of it. And some people have even done good answers to the whole Watchmen, message that, superheroes suck and they would be fucking evil and deranged if they existed in the real world. But that's kind of besides the point. Then there's another contingent of people who are, of course, saying that Watchmen should never get a sequel, that Watchmen is too important to ever get one, it's a standalone story, it's a seminal piece of work, it should be left alone, and it also brings up the whole question of comic book creator rights and how the big two continue to find ways to screw over people over seminal works that they have poured their heart and souls into, and this is the latest, biggest fuck you to Alan Moore. I understand kind of both sides. Even I, who is going to spend the next few minutes kind of criticizing this storyline, have to admit that there is something really cool in a kind of perverse, base, fantard way in the back of my mind when I see this thing, because it's freaking cool to see Ozymandias interact with Lex Luthor. It's cool to see Batman interact with Ozymandias and then Rorschach. There is something on that base fantard level that exists even inside myself that I find appealing to this. And credit where credit is due, Gary Frank does some of the best work he's ever done in his whole career with this book. The attention to detail is staggering. It doesn't look like Dave Gibbons, who had a more, I want to say like simplistic art style, whereas Gary Frank is more rough. But it feels very appropriate for the story that's being told here, and Gary Frank actually avoids some of the pitfalls that are common to his work, where he kind of uses similar expressions for characters. He doesn't really have great facial diversity when it comes to like features and the way they express emotions and that kind of thing. But here he does some absolutely fantastic work. For example, the whole portion where we see New 52 origins of Superman, where Clark is going to the prom, and he's feeling very lonely, he doesn't have many friends, and the friends he does have been paired off for the dance, and he just doesn't really get why he should be doing this, and that whole scene, the way it's framed, the way it's shot, the way it evokes Clark's loneliness, it's really, really great stuff. And that's just one example I can think off the top of my head. And also the way Gary Frank illustrates the Watchmen side of things, the world of Watchmen, it all feels very, very legit. And in the hands of a better writer, or at least a different writer, I should say, I would probably call this a great success. The problem is that Geoff Johns is the guy doing this. And now, I'm a guy who likes Geoff Johns. I've reviewed several of his comic books over the years. I'm a big fan of a lot of the stuff he's done, like Superman, Son of New Krypton, Brainiac, the Batman Earth 1 novels. I'm a very, very big fan of those. I love that whole reimagining of the character. He's done a lot of things that I have enjoyed, and a lot of events that I've enjoyed as well. In fact, one of my favorite storylines by Geoff Johns is Infinite Crisis. And Infinite Crisis is a whole big storyline that's dedicated to the whole idea of, Watchmen did not make comics dark, and just because comics have gotten darker, that doesn't mean that we've lost the hope and optimism. That doesn't mean that comic books and superheroes are shit and worthless now because they're a bit rough around the edges. And it also dealt with kind of fan perceptions of comic books over the years. It dealt with the whole idea of just because the good old days worked back then, that doesn't mean we should bring them back here just to make ourselves feel better. There was a lot of good commentary on Infinite Crisis, the kind of which Geoff Johns does not typically go into. Johns is kind of like a good J.J. Abrams, and what I mean by that is he's a guy who's very much rooted in nostalgia. He's a guy who has a very kind of set idea of what, say, Green Lantern is, what Flash is, and what kind of the DC universe is, especially Superman. And he's the guy who brings back kind of like the glory of the old days back here to kind of, capitalize on fanboy nostalgia, because DC characters are kind of in a fucked position because they're seen as super iconic. And unless your name is Batman, people are not really gonna take lightly to the fact that you want to alter them around in different kinds of ways. Like, just look at what happened with Earth 1 Superman, where JMS changed a few things and kind of the tone of Superman, and everyone continues to lose their shit over that reimagining of the character because Superman is kind of like a beached whale. He's gonna drop dead and die if we don't all salivate him with our fanboy tongues. It's that kind of unfortunate situation that a lot of DC characters find themselves in, and Geoff Johns is aware of that, and he taps into that very, very much. And that's not to call him, once again, a bad writer, because unlike J.J. Abrams, Geoff Johns is actually able to have his nostalgia dick, satisfied, but he's also able to tell good or fun or engaging storylines. For example, Flash Rebirth, Green Lantern Rebirth, the various Green Lantern-related events that he did, like Blackest Night. Blackest Night is awesome. But he is not really the kind of guy you should get to write a Watchmen sequel, because Alan Moore's Watchmen is one of the very few wholly objective stories that I know of that deal with so many different ideologies, so many different subject matters, and they just present them the way they are. No bullshit, no bias involved. He explores, racism, patriotism, nationalism, sexism. He does all of that stuff and so much more that's not even involved with, like, the superhero antics. And he does that all with such quality, with such depth, and such objectivism. There's no side that he takes. He doesn't glorify anyone. He just presents them all as they are with kind of cold, hard facts. And I can't really name a lot of storylines that do that. And like I already established, Geoff Johns is not that kind of writer. Johns is very much a dude who plays up to his own very specific kinds of sensibilities, to his own very specific kinds of tropes that he wants to play with. And in fact, I would even call him one of the people who has inadvertently been kind of to blame for some of DC's more questionable actions. And so I just kind of feel like it's fundamentally wrong for Johns, of all people, to be doing this storyline. Like I said, he's the guy who, brings up the glory days, kind of unobjectively, but he also has that modern comic book thing where he kind of glorifies the violence of, modern comic books. And so there's just a lot of fundamental things with Geoff Johns that do not make him a good guy to do this storyline. And that's not even to kind of call myself like a Watchmen fanboy. Like, I know some people are going to say, oh, well, Ivan, you're a fan-tard of Watchmen, and so you're just going to glorify the book. I'm actually not that crazy about Watchmen. It's a masterpiece, sure, but it's not really a book that does anything for me personally, and most of my appreciation and respect for it comes from the fact that it did influence comic books in the way it has, and also the fact that Alan Moore was able to pull off something that I wish I could do in my own writing, and that's present these various different sides to a conflict or to a discussion, and present them all objectively, no biases, no strawmans, no nothing at all, just the way they are. And I respect the Watchmen book for that, but I'm not really that crazy about the Watchmen book. Like, if you gave me a top 50 comic books I've ever read in my life, I doubt Watchmen would even make it into that list, because it just doesn't do anything for me personally. But I still think that a book like that needs a very specific kind of writer to do it. For example, Tom King would make an excellent guy to try and follow up Watchmen and cross over with the DC Universe. I know I've bitched and moaned about Tom King's Batman ad infinitum on this YouTube channel, but the fact of the matter is, he has managed to kind of do what Moore did back then, where he has lots of different sides to a particular conflict or a particular subject matter, and he's able to present them in really interesting ways with a great big deal of objectivism. In fact, the worst Tom King stories, i.e. his Batman work, are where his fanboyism gets in the way of his better writing sensibilities. And I honestly think that he could, with great success even, pull off this kind of storyline. And honestly, I think Tom King is a respected enough comic book artist where you could have put him in charge of a book like this, and you could have just let him go nuts with it. And I think there's like a 95% chance he would have pulled it off. And now just to kind of get over to the Watchmen, or rather to the Doomsday Clock book itself, because I've just spent the last 15 minutes just kind of giving you the setup for the punchline, i.e. the rest of the review, quote-unquote. And that's the fact that the Doomsday Clock is okay. Like I said, I'm not someone who feels overly great emotions over the Watchmen book. Like I said, I respect it for what it is, and I really appreciate what Moore was able to do with it, but it's not a book that really speaks to me in the way other comic books have in the past. And so I don't really feel too much when we're getting like a continuation of it, and I'm also not getting any kind of big outrage over the fact that they are just doing the Watchmen as doing a sequel to Watchmen and crossing over with DC. I know a lot of people who are big fans of Watchmen who are in both camps, where crossing over with DC is the craziest, most insane shit they've ever seen in a good way, and other people who are seething in anger at every mention of the Doomsday Clock. And so I'm who's just kind of neutral on the whole Watchmen business for the most part, or is rather kind of detached from it, I should probably say. This book doesn't really do anything for me. It's technically fine, I guess. Geoff Johns is trying to emulate Alan Moore's, 9-panel grid style. Sometimes it works. Other times I feel like he's just doing it for the sake of tradition, I guess. And ultimately I feel like there are quite a few pages here where you could have just done a regular comic book layout and it would have felt much, much better. Like I said, Johns is not the kind of writer who typically does stuff like this, and his style of emulating Moore is fine, but a lot of it feels kind of obtuse. His whole way of trying to make like these big epic parallels that probably means something, they're all there the way Moore would kind of do them, but unlike Moore, I don't really feel like it serves any kind of big purpose. It feels like it's just trying to be deep, profound, and thematic for the sake of itself. And while Watchmen, while I'm reading it, is able to at least engage me while I'm reading it, the Doomsday Clock just isn't able to do that. And even my base fantard, who's like, Ermagerd, Rorschach, and Buttman are in the same page, even that guy was satisfied fairly early on into the storyline. The closest thing I've gotten to feeling anything while reading this is during the issue that focuses on the new Rorschach. And this is actually one element of the book that I do think is legitimately very well executed. I don't think it justifies the existence of the whole other stuff, but the whole deal with like the new Rorschach is that he is the son of the therapist that interviews Rorschach during the comic book. And he survives the alien attack orchestrated by Ozymandias. And he survives, his parents die, and he was just right at the edge of the blast. So he was the only guy who survived, and he saw like thousands upon thousands of people get mutilated right in front of his eyes, and then makes him go completely psychotic. And this is actually one place where it makes sense to pair up Rorschach with Batman, because this dude, he's a guy who is angry at the world. He's angry at a very specific, also, enemy, but he can't do anything about it. He's angry, he's psychotic, but he doesn't really have any way to focus it. And so when the world finds out that Ozymandias was behind the alien attack, that, makes him become focused. It gives him a goal. And so he kind of becomes like a twisted perversion of Batman in that respect. And that is actually one of those thematic things that actually feel earned and very legitimate in the book. A lot of the other stuff rings very hollow to me. For example, the Watchmen world, when it goes tits up in the first issue, is in the year 1992. And that is supposed to be a Death of Superman reference because Death of Superman happens in 1992. The problem with that is, the way the world of Watchmen in 1992 is written, from the news reports, from like the political climate, the way the political climate is kind of articulated and sold to you, it's fucking 2018. The president is obviously Donald Trump, and once again, we're obviously bitching and moaning about Trump in a comic book. Okay, not only is that gotten really repetitive, it doesn't make any freaking sense in this context. Watchmen, when the story ends, is over in like 1986. This is 92, and the political climate has in 7 years advanced like 30 years in the same kind of way the regular Earth has. That makes absolutely no sense. There's no way a guy like Trump, the president of Trump, would show up in 1992 in our world, much less the world of Watchmen. And just like I said, the way the politics are framed at the very beginning, it all rings very hollow. It very much rings like one of those things where, ha ha ha, look at us, we're trying to be, we're trying to be topical, we're trying to be satirical to the modern times. But the problem is you're not in the modern times. You're in 1992, so you should probably go find some political stuff that was going on in the early 90s and probably do a spin on that. Or if you want to do a storyline that's set in the 2018 year of the Watchmen universe, why not just put it in 2018? Oh, but wait, but if we don't do that, Ivan, if we don't make it in 1992, then we can't make a Death of Superman reference, because that piece of shit story really deserves to be constantly mentioned over and over and over again, doesn't it? So yeah, that whole thing rings really hollow. And then there's the business of the Superman theory. So, Geoff Johns sets up a kind of event in this storyline where Lex Luthor presents to the world the Superman theory. The Superman theory is as follows. Have you ever noticed that 90% of superheroes all come from America? Why is it like that? The reason why it's like that is because someone in the United States government has been secretly orchestrating the creation of thousands, or rather hundreds, of metahumans throughout the existence of the DC universe as a way to weaponize it and as a way to America to become like the top dog and to possibly, try and conquer the world later on. That's not the stupidest idea I've ever heard. In fact, I feel like that's an idea that could have some legitimate merit, but there are two problems with it, and they both just kind of sink the whole thing. First of all, it comes from Lex fucking Luthor. Lex Luthor has no business being the guy to release something like this. No business whatsoever, because everyone knows Lex Luthor is a supervillain. Even if you try to say, like, the New 52 continuity happened, even in New 52, Lex Luthor has been convicted multiple times of disastrous things, and it is known that he is a bastard and a douchebag. So immediately having Lex freaking Luthor be the guy who apparently turns the public against the entire superhero community, people who he has factually and publicly tried to murder for years on end and is known to hate, makes absolutely no freaking sense. And the second problem with this is that it's a fucking theory. He has no evidence. There is no evidence in the 5 issues of Doomsday Clock that we've gotten that at all presents the possibility that this is actually true. This is called a theory multiple times in the storyline, and I don't know why that is. Like, if you want Lex Luthor to be the guy to turn the people, the regular man, against superheroes, okay, why don't you have him present actual evidence? Why don't you have him leak out information, documents, or something, or have him do like some kind of research study where he realizes, oh shit, Firestorm and Aquaman have like the same like source of power or the same genetic thing triggered their abilities or created them. If you did something like that, I could kind of buy what's going on. But the fact that Lex Luthor just comes out one day and says, the government's made every superhuman ever by, and everyone goes, Ermagerd, is fucking stupid to the nth degree. I cannot believe they would do this. And this is the DC universe. People in the DC universe are typically not this vile and stupid about their superheroes the way the Marvel people are, and I know what the intent is. It's supposed to evoke Watchmen. It's supposed to put Batman and Superman, well, not Superman, but Batman and everybody else in a bad position in the storyline, so we can once again draw more parallels to Watchmen. But it's done in such a stupid, hard-to-believe way, I cannot buy it for a second. The one other interesting thing about the book is the fact that everyone has an unyielding loyalty to Superman. Like, throughout the whole book, you'll see people say, well, Batman's fucking crazy and he should be taken down, or Firestorm is full of shit for saying his powers are accidental, or he's insane as well. You'll hear a lot of people complain and talk about their superheroes, but Superman is kind of like the exception. Superman is kind of seen as the one exception to the rule, the guy who is probably going to be able to stick his head above the mud while everyone else drowns in it, which is once again another Geoff Johns thing, where Geoff Johns really likes to glorify Superman to an absurd level, and he likes to evoke like the Christopher Reeves movies a lot. In fact, he recently retconned the fact that Superman's first public appearance was him like saving Lois and the copter, which is verbatim what happens in Donner's first Superman movie. And so that is kind of interesting to see that Superman is like the beacon of light in a world that is going to hell. But like I said, the premise for the whole Superman theory is really, really, really stupid. They might be able to save us later on. Maybe we haven't just gotten the full story yet. But the way it's presented in the story right now, it just feels like Lex Luthor came up with a bullshit theory. He said it on a news network, and everyone's just decided to believe it without any real basis. Like, I feel like if they had anyone else do this, it would have made considerably much, much more sense. The other stuff that's going on in this comic book are, there are two characters called Marionette and Mime, who are Charlton character XPs of Punch and Julie. Punch and Julie were like Firestorm villains, and then Mime and Marionette are like Dr. Manhattan villains, I guess. And the thing with them is that Dr. Manhattan thwarted a crime by Mime and Marionette where they could have killed a lot of people, and he almost kills the two of them, but when he sees that Marionette is pregnant, he decides not to kill her, which, okay, I can kind of buy that. I think that is kind of a little cool twist, admittedly. And Ozymandias wants to bring them over to the DC universe because they will be able to like remind Dr. Manhattan of a moment of humanity so he can like go back to the Watchmen world and save it from nuclear annihilation. That whole plot line is not the worst thing I've ever heard. I feel like it's actually kind of been decently executed. The problem with it is that Mime and Marionette have a clown motif. And the clown motif is constantly being kind of compared and contrasted to the Joker. And Marionette was, like I said, pregnant, and her baby disappeared. And Ozymandias agreed to help her find her kid if they help them bring back Dr. Manhattan and save the Watchmen universe. And a lot of people have speculated the fact that the Joker could be the son of Mime and Marionette, and I hope to God that is not what is happening, because that would be fucking retarded on a scale never before seen in the history of mankind. That is an awful, awful theory that should not come true. I doubt they're going to do that, because they set up that whole 3 Jokers thing in DC Rebirth, and that's never been followed up on, so I could just chalk this up to like being a stupid fan theory, which is admittedly very, very possible, but holy shit, if that actually happens, that would be like the worst thing ever. I'm not even remotely lying. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the Doomsday Clock, what's going on in and out of it and around it. I don't know, maybe this book is going to pick up. Maybe the magic of like the Rorschach issue is going to be brought over to like the main storyline and I'm going to get invested into it. But so far, I'm just not feeling this. It's not bad. Like on a technical level, this is perfectly average. It's perfectly okay. There's mostly nothing that offends me here. But ultimately, this feels kind of pointless so far. Like, if you're gonna do a dumb DC and Watchmen crossover, at least make it a blast. Like, don't pretend you're gonna do anything with this. Like, just go for the dumb bombast and at least try to make it a trashy good time, if nothing else. I would prefer something that's ridiculously stupid and trashy and at least entertaining on that level over something that's just really, really ridiculously average and is just not eliciting almost any emotions from me whatsoever. So, what are your thoughts on Doomsday Clock so far? Do you think Johns should have gotten this gig? Are you, like me, wishing we just could have gotten this creative team working on Batman Earth 1 Volume 3 instead? What are your thoughts down below? Please comment down there, and hopefully I'll see you next time. Bye.